Hey, did you get that shot?
Yeah, I got it right in the eye.
Hi, I'm Mystical Blue, and welcome to another exciting episode from Marvelous Videos, where I'll be taking you through, while we have all fond memories of various sitcoms that we enjoyed while growing up, The Flintstones remains one of the most iconic television animated series. It first aired on the ABC network in 1960 and was also the very first animated series to hold a primetime slot on any television network. The show followed the lives of the Flintstone family in the Stone Age, and it went on to become one of the best comedy series of all time. Even today, this show remains immensely popular, and people still talk about its unique and entertaining storylines. Today, we will explore this show that is still fondly remembered by its fans and tell you everything about the Flintstones. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
One for Mommy and one for Daddy. Come on.
What inspired the creators to work on a show like this? The Flintstones was produced by the famous duo William Hanna and Joseph Barbara, whose creative vision helped create this genre-defining show. They decided to make this show to replicate Tom and Jerry's success, which managed to captivate both younger and older audiences. They also went back and forth between the show's settings and faced difficulties in developing a program with a singular storyline that focuses on the domestic situations in a household. After considering placing the show in an ancient Roman setting, Hannah sought some inspiration from the Honeymooners and set the show in the Stone Age. Barbara also believed that anything set in the modern world could be converted to the Stone Age. They finally struck gold when they came up with a storyline that showed the Flintstones family in the Stone Age setting, wherein they struggle with modern day problems. Hanna-Barbera faced trouble when the Honeymooners actor Jackie Gleason considered suing them for creating characters that resembled his show. However, Gleason finally did not go ahead with this decision, as he didn't want people to know him as the man who killed Fred Flintstone. The creators also borrowed some inspiration from the Stone Age cartoons, the 1955 series titled The First Badman, and various themes from prehistoric times and modern day inventions. The initial working title for the show was The Flagstones, but it was later changed to Gladstones until they finally decided to settle with Flintstones. While it was initially a difficult task for Hanna-Barbera to convince the network to approve this project, Flintstones soon became a huge hit and was also the longest animated series to run on the network for nearly 3 decades until 1997.
It's been a week. I guess they're still investigating Barney's character.
Exploring the show and some of the episodes. The show first aired on the ABC network in September 1960, and it followed the lives of Fred and Wilma Flintstone as they navigated various conflicts in their day-to-day life. It went on for 6 seasons and had a total of 166 episodes until it was cancelled in 1966. While the show was set in the Stone Age era, it incorporated various characteristics of modern life that often posed problems for the Flintstones. Fred and Wilma had a pet dinosaur named Dino, which was initially supposed to be a talkative, bright blued furred Snorkosaurus. Dino's skin colour kept changing throughout the show, but he mostly had purple fur. The Flintstones also had a daughter named Pebbles later in the show, who was initially supposed to be a son named Fred Flintstone Jr. However, the creators finally decided to go with a girl child, since girl dolls sold better and gave them larger profits from a merchandise point of view. The Flintstones family was quite close to the Rubbles family and were neighbours in the Stone Age town of Bedrock. Barney Rubble and his wife Betty were best friends with Fred and Wilma, and they often hung out together and even went on various adventures with each other. Barney and Fred often came up with absurd business ideas and then worked together to execute them and cause trouble for their wives. One of the show's most memorable episodes was titled The Drive-In, wherein Fred and Barney get sick of their jobs and decide to open a drive-in restaurant without consulting their wives. They even find a drive-in restaurant plot that does not require any down payment, and they immediately buy the place from a business agent. Fred and Barney quit their current jobs and keep their new restaurant business a secret from their wives until they start making a profit. However, things don't go as planned when 2 employed women named Gwendolyn and Daisy contact Fred to get an interview for the positions of waitresses at their drive-in restaurant. They reach out to Fred by telephoning him at his home, where Wilma picks up the call and talks to the waitresses. Gwendolyn and Daisy only mention that they are looking to assist Fred and Barney, which further increases Wilma's confusion. The two girls later even show up at the Flintstones' residence to perform a song for Fred and Barney, who deny knowing the girls and pretend there must be some confusion. However, they secretly reach out to the two girls and hire them to serve the customers at their drive-in restaurant. In the meantime, Fred and Barney decide to do the cooking and officially start their business. Wilma and Betty continue to feel like something is amiss, and they call their husbands' former employers to find out the truth. When they learn that their husbands have quit their jobs, they get into a car and search for Fred and Barney. They soon stop for a meal at the drive-in restaurant, where they recognize the two waitresses and even see their husbands working in the kitchen. While the waitresses get tired and resign from their job, Wilma and Betty set up and serve the customers instead. They even convince their husbands to give up this business and return to their former jobs, and Fred and Barney then sell the place and suffer a 50% loss on their investments. This was not even the first time that the two came together as business partners and suffered losses, and Fred had once even gambled away his entire paycheck in order to open a pool hall with Barney. The show also incorporated animals such as saber-toothed cats, woolly mammoths, and dinosaurs that worked for humans. The Flintstones often used these animals for labor, even though they had modern appliances and automobiles for them the same. The show's opening theme shows Fred climbing up a dinosaur's neck in order to reach his tailor's house. And there were instances where he even goes to a gas station and uses a mammoth named Ethel to fill his car with gas. In a particular episode named The Girls' Night Out, they used a bird's beak as a vinyl player. This episode begins with Wilma Flintstone complaining to her husband about being home all day, while Fred believes that he takes her out occasionally. Wilma then asks him to name one such instance in the near past, and Fred is unable to recall even a single instance. He then tells her he took her to Boulder Beach for their honeymoon and then goes out to eat lunch with Barney. The two of them eat together while Fred and Barney devise a plan to take their wives to an amusement park. At the park, Wilma and Betty get tired of going on various rides, while Fred decides to make a vinyl record of his voice and give it to his wife as a souvenir. He decides to sing "Listen to the Rocking Bird," and he uses a bird's beak to press the vinyl and record his song. Wilma and Betty soon lose their patience and decide it's best to go home. Fred's record vinyl ends up in the hands of a teenager, and he soon gets famous among all the teenagers of Bedrock. His record finally ends up on the radio, and the Keen Teen Record Company also requests the singer to come forth and reveal himself. When Wilma listens to Fred's song on the radio, she immediately contacts the record company's owner, who rushes to the Flintstones' home and takes Fred away for a makeover. They decide to introduce Fred as the world's oldest teenager named Hi-Fi and launch a campaign to boost the sales of his vinyl record. Fred's record ends up as a sensational hit, and he even goes on tour while his wife and the Rubbles accompany him. Eventually, Wilma and Betty get tired of traveling, and they spread a rumor that brings Fred's singing career to an end. In this way, Wilma and Betty often teamed together to get their husbands out of difficult situations. In one particular episode, they teamed up to keep Fred awake for 3 days straight after assuming that he had contracted a deadly dinosaur disease. This episode was titled The X-Ray Story and was one of the most popular episodes in the entire series. When the Flintstones' pet Dino falls sick, Wilma worries about him and asks Fred to take Dino to the vet. The vet takes a few X-rays and learns that Dino has a dinopeptic germ in his stomach, which can easily be cured with some rest. While Fred and Dino leave the clinic, the vet's assistant accidentally writes Fred's name on the X-ray picture. In an unfortunate series of events, the X-ray flies out the window due to a strong wind and ends up in the hands of a policeman. The police realize it is unusual for a human to have such an X-ray, and he shows the report to a doctor at Bedrock's forensics laboratory. The doctor also assumes that this X-ray depicts a human stomach affected by dinopeptic germs and that Fred Flintstone has caught this illness. These germs were fatal to humans, and the only way of curing them was by keeping the host's body awake and active for 72 hours. The doctor decides to visit the Flintstones, and he talks to Wilma about her husband's condition. He also asks Wilma not to tell Fred about this illness, as he may be unable to handle the shock. Wilma and the Rubbles come together to ensure that Fred doesn't sleep for 3 full days, and they resort to various techniques to keep him awake. Initially, they keep forcing Fred to dance at various nightclubs such as the Rockadaro, the Rocking 20s and Rock and Bop, until he gives up on dancing. They then force him to drink gallons of black coffee and even take him ice skating until the next morning. When they finally return home, Fred is exhausted and confused, but Wilma and the Rubbles force him to take a cold shower. They poke toothpicks in his eyes to keep them wide open and even blow a loud horn in his ear to snap him out of a sleepy state. While all these methods fail to keep Fred awake, Wilma finally decides to ignore the doctor's advice and inform her husband about his illness. She hoped that Fred would willingly stay awake when he learns that his dinopeptic illness could even kill him, and Fred almost goes into a frenzy before he realizes there might have been a misunderstanding. He asks Wilma to show him the X-ray photograph, and he finally realizes that someone must have misnamed the X-ray. He explains the situation to Wilma and the Rubbles, who apologize for their behavior and eventually allow him to sleep. As the episode ends, an exhausted Fred falls to the floor and dozes off next to their pet Dino. Like all sitcoms, this show also had special themed episodes for various festivals. The Flintstones Christmas themed episode from the 5th season became one of their highest rated episodes ever. The episode was titled Christmas Flintstone, and it all began with Fred and Barney walking around Bedrock during the festive season. Fred tells Barney that he needs extra money to buy some presents, and he soon sees a sign for a part-time job at Mayrock's department store. He decides to apply for the job without finding out the details, and later tells Wilma that he has applied for a second job. While Wilma doesn't like the idea of him working 2 jobs at once, Fred states that this new job will only last for a week. When Fred shows up at his new job, he is asked to wrap some gifts and perform stockroom duties. Fred wanders off during his working hours and ends up in the toy department when Mr. Mayrock orders him to get back to work in the basement stockroom. Fred heads to the basement in the store's elevator, but doesn't realize it is out of order. Mr. Mayrock finally loses his cool and decides to fire Fred when one of their workers informs him that the man who was supposed to play Santa has fallen sick. Mr. Mayrock asks Fred to work as Santa Claus, who turns out to be great at his job. He has a very successful day entertaining the children, and he returns home and brags about his day at work. Fred returns to work the next day and eventually has a very successful week pretending to be Santa Claus. He especially gets along well with the young kids and even ends up on a TV program on Christmas Eve. As the Mayrock store closes, 2 elves named Blinky and Twinky visit Fred and take him away to meet the real Santa Claus. While Fred initially thinks they are just 2 kids playing a prank, he soon ends up on Santa's real sleigh and reaches the North Pole. He meets with Santa Claus, who tells him that he has a cold and that he needs Fred to replace him and distribute the presents on Christmas Eve. Fred agrees to do so and leaves the North Pole with Blinky and Twinky, who assist him in distributing the presents to the kids in the entire world. After finishing his work, Fred finally heads home when he realizes that he forgot the presents for his family in Santa's sleigh. He dejectedly heads home, where he is surprised to see Wilma and the Rubbles standing with his gifts in their hands. They tell him that they're glad to know that he recovered from his cold, while Fred looks up in the sky where real Santa Claus is flying away in his sleigh. As the episode comes to an end, they all head inside and open the presents while they wish everyone a Merry Christmas. In this way, the Flintstones was also a wholesome family show that was perfect for a family audience. Hanna-Barbera always had this particular vision for this show, and they managed to execute it flawlessly.
Atta girl. Now throw it back to Daddy.
Some of the things that you realise as adults about this show. While The Flintstones was essentially a family show, there were some instances in the shows that kids did not really pick up on and only realised after they watched the show again as adults. One such key thing was the fact that the show used animals as a substitute for modern day appliances, and that these animals were often subjected to cruel tasks. Moreover, these animals sometimes even spoke directly to the audience and complained about the nature of the work that they were forced to do. While kids mostly found such scenes funny, they grew up to to realise that the show had a lot of animal cruelty and was a little immoral. Another key detail that went unnoticed by most kids was the fact that the show had a Christmas episode, even though it was set in the Stone Age before the birth of Christ. Of course, the show was also filled with dirty jokes that were inappropriate for a younger audience, but these jokes were quite suitable and limited to just a few scenes. It also focused on some deeper issues, such as infertility, which was quite ahead of its time for a show that was created in the 60s. After Fred and Wilma have Pebbles, Barney and Betty also tried to have a child of their own, but they failed to conceive a child naturally. Eventually, they adopted a kid named Bam Bam, who was left on their doorstep in the middle of the night. However, they had to go through a lot of trouble to adopt Bam Bam legally, and were once even told that they could not keep him. Things turned quite dark when Barney decided to attempt suicide after being told he could not adopt the child, but Fred finally intervened and saved his life. While The Flintstones was a fantastic comedy show, it delved into darker issues at times and was filled with intricate details that only adults could notice.
Fella? Ouch! Unbelievable!
Looking back at the evergreen characters, Fred Flintstone was initially the main character of this series, and he was famously voiced by Alan Reed. Fred was known for using and popularising the catchphrase "Yabba Dabba Doo." This phrase was created by Hanna-Barbera when Alan Reed told them about his mother being fond of a hairstyling cream slogan, "A little dabble do you." Fred worked as a Bronto crane operator at the Slate Rock and Gravel Company, where he essentially controlled a Brontosaurus that was used as an excavating machine. Fred was quite a hot-tempered person who often got agitated over trivial things and lost his composure. However, he showed a lot of character development across the show and always cared for his family. Fred appeared as an overweight, stout man who often indulged in eating a lot of unhealthy junk food. Fred's wife, Wilma Flintstone, was a more level-headed and intelligent character who was voiced by Jean Vander Pyle. Wilma was very dedicated and loyal toward her husband, but she could also get quite jealous if he came into contact with other girls. She also had a habit of overspending sometimes, and she didn't think too much about splurging money on something frivolous. The Flintstones had a daughter named Pebbles, and she was first introduced at the end of the 3rd season. While Pebbles did not play a huge role in the series, she has been introduced as the main lead in numerous spin-off shows. Pebbles' birth on the show caused quite a sensation among the viewers, and television networks across the world arranged for various contests for the viewers to pick the name, age, gender, and weight of the unborn child. Fred and Wilma themselves appeared to announce the winner for one such contest, wherein a Florida butcher accurately guessed the baby's weight and won a world trip. The Flintstones also had a pet dinosaur, Dino, who often acted like a dog. Dino often came running to the door and licked Fred's face when he got home from work, which soon became a running gag on the show. The Flintstones were close to the Rubble family, who were their next door neighbours. Barney Rubble was Fred's best friend, and the two shared a lot of similar hobbies and interests, such as bowling and golf. He also worked in the same quarry as Fred, and the two sometimes got into fights, but always reconciled and became friends again. Barney's wife, Betty Rubble, was quite close to Wilma and also had a habit of spending money unnecessarily. Betty and Barney did not have kids of their own, but they adopted a boy named Bam Bam in the show's 4th season.
Yes. See? What did I tell you? Fakes.
A long line of movies and subsequent TV shows followed. The Flintstones is one of the most popular animated series in pop culture history, and they inspired several spin-off shows and movies. After the show was cancelled in 1966, a film titled The Man Called Flintstone was released in the same year. A few years later, The Flintstones was revived in the early 70s when a series of movies and shows focused on Pebbles and Bam Bam were released. Various shows incorporated different versions of the Flintstones and the Rubbles, and one such show even depicted Fred and Barney as police officers. The two were even featured in a show where they encountered a Marvel Comics superhero named The Thing. Shows such as The New Fred and Barney Show 1979 and The Flintstones Comedy Show 1980 to 82 were also released for a short period, along with various television specials such as A Flintstone Christmas 1977 and The Flintstones New Neighbours 1980. A television series titled What a Cartoon also also featured a few episodes titled Dino, Stay Out, 1995, and Dino, The Great Egg Escape, 1997, which focused on the story of the Flintstones' pet dinosaur. The original show was later adapted into a live-action film in 1994, which received praise for sticking to the show's themes. However, it was criticised for its humour, which was not deemed appropriate for a family audience. A prequel to this film was later released in 2000, titled The Flintstones in Viva Rock Vegas. This prequel was set in the events that occurred before the movie and the original show, and it explored the story of how Fred and Barney first met their respective wives, Wilma and Betty. Recently, a show titled Yabba Dabba Dinosaurus was created by Warner Brothers Animation in 2021. It was the first full-length Flintstones-related TV series created without Hanna and Barbara after they died in 2001 and 2006 respectively. It was a spin-off series that focused on the lives of Pebbles and Bam Bam, who are now best friends who go on many adventures with their pet Dino. A follow-up series titled Bedrock is also in the works, which is going to focus on Pebbles' career while her father, Fred, is finally on the brink of retirement. The show will also finally mark the end of the Stone Age for the Flintstones and the Rubbles as they finally enter the new Bronze Age. Marvellous verdict. Wit and intelligence made this one of the time-tested shows. The Flintstones was undoubtedly one of the best animated shows ever created, and it was filled with humour and creative storylines that made it an instant hit. It was quite well written, and each season of the show offered something new and unique. The characters on the show also showed a lot of development across seasons, which is noticeable especially for Fred, as he progressively grows into a better person throughout the show. One of the best things about the Flintstones was its setting, as it creatively blended modern-day characteristics with a prehistoric background. While it was essentially an animated cartoon sitcom, the show also focused on social issues and touched upon some themes that were not openly discussed in the 60s. One example would be the Rubble family's struggles with infertility, their decision to adopt Bam Bam, and Barney's fragile mental state during the adoption process. The Flintstones and the Rubbles also had an incredible bond, and the audience resonated well with such likeable characters with family values. The show's animation was quite simple yet detailed, which added to the show's charm and only made it a more pleasing watch.
To give Wilma.
Conclusion. To sum it up, The Flintstones is one of the finest comedy animated shows of all time, and it was one of Hanna-Barbera's best works. It is a classic piece of pop culture history, and the show is fondly remembered by fans even today. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.